Hello, everyone. It is officially noon, and if you couldn't tell, we are very anxious and excited to start our pre-event speaker webinar today, featuring Maggie Gough and Marissa Kalkman, WCWI's Executive Director. If you have any questions today regarding technology and or how to use the chat function, we have a staff member who's monitoring our WCWI email account. That email address is wcwi@wellnesscouncilwi.org. Otherwise, please use the Zoom chat function. We will be monitoring that as well. For today's webinar, we will be navigating a little bit through a few updates with resources and annual conference that's coming up in a few short weeks here, where you will be able to meet all of us on today's webinar. From there, we're going to dive into an interview-style webinar, different from the previous ones you may have attended, speaking to the microinfluence as an organizational culture change strategy. From there, we'll have an intensive Q&A where you'll use your Zoom chat function to answer or ask all your burning questions that you have and create a wonderful dialogue. And from there, if you want to continue the conversation, Maggie will be at our 29th Annual Employee Wellbeing Conference on September 12th. Many of you have attended the previous pre-event speaker webinars, and so therefore I always like to share more relevant and new information to connect you to WCWI's community of connected employers who are transforming Wisconsin's workforce. With our wonderful community, we talk about sharing best practices and answering that question of, well, what are other Wisconsin organizations finding success with when it comes to employee well-being? Recently, we shared 3 ways Wisconsin employers are supporting stress management. Now, let's take a step back and address the fact that when it's, let's all agree that the best solution is a comprehensive and collaborative employee well-being strategy when it comes to employee stress management and support. But within that comprehensive strategy, what are Wisconsin employers doing to combat stress in their workplace? And here within a recent blog, we listed 3 simple tools and resources that you can use as a WCWI member to really help enhance and or find creative ways to support your employees further. After today's webinar, within the follow-up email, we will share these resources with you. One is a sample policy that supports stress management within the workplace, shared by the STAR group. The other is a way for you to bring acts of kindness to your employees, whether it's expressing gratitude or expressing kindness to the educators throughout the state of Wisconsin. Additionally, we have a wonderful guide brought to you by Freighter Health on supporting employees' resiliency skills. Now remember, if you ever want to talk strategy, our WCWI staff is here to support you, in addition to our featured speaker, Maggie, as well. Additionally, I want to give an update on your Q4 opportunities. We have our flagship training, the Well Workplace University, on WCWI 7 benchmarks, taking place on Thursday, October 17th. Here, you'll master the skills to design a customized employee wellness strategy based on your organization's needs, values, and goals. In addition, we have an intensive workshop offered on Thursday, November 14th, featuring Brian Passon as well. This is all about creating transformational experiences and leveraging that power for humanizing the workplace. As we mentioned, on September 11th and 12th, we are hosting our 29th Annual Employee Wellbeing Conference. As I was looking at the attendee list for today's webinar, I'm really excited to see the names and faces that we'll see in September as well. So as our staff is running around and as Maggie is sharing her expertise, please come up to us, say hello, introduce yourself, and let's connect. All right, so today's webinar, as I hinted, is a little bit different. We're going to have an interview-styled webinar between Maggie and also Marissa as well. To give a little intro and bio to Maggie, She has been a part of the corporate wellness industry for over a decade, and she has been a true student of her experiences, always challenging how things can be made better. This has launched her into a position of leadership on a local and national level. If you want the truth, a real, authentic conversation about corporate health, she's the person to talk to. In addition to her business life, she's a wife, a mother to 3 children, a daughter, a sister, and actively engaged in her community as an ambassador for curiosity, which basically means that in any given conversation, you will find her asking thought-provoking questions to lead us deeper into wisdom of what it means to be fully human. And today we'll have that conversation as well. Now, Marissa Kaufman, our Executive Director of WCWI, leads with a mindset that well-being in the workplace is good business and the right thing to do, with resounding positive effects on the employee experience, engagement, retention, recruitment, productivity, and overall health. Marissa is determined to support WCWI members, like you, with her results-focused drive to bring exceptional service, expert consultation, and unparalleled connection to the Wisconsin employers in our community. So at this moment, I'm going to switch my host controls to Maggie, and we'll begin our interview.
Hello, everyone. So thanks so much, Lisa, for the introduction to both myself and to Maggie. And I have to say, I can absolutely attest to most of everything I just heard in Maggie's bio. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her over these last several months, and she is a real light and innovator in the space of employee wellness. So Maggie, thank you for being here with us. We're excited to be hosting you and looking forward to helping our members get a little bit deeper idea of what it is that you're going to be presenting at the annual conference. So to begin, can you share a little bit about your philosophy around corporate wellness and explain to our listeners how you describe culture?
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here today. And first, I just have to say that for those of you who are members of WCWI, I met Marissa at a leadership retreat with a handful of the nation's best and smartest leaders. And I just need to share with you that she is by far one of the brightest lights in the room, so you are in good hands. And furthermore, as I've been working more with WCWI, this team of women is absolutely one of the most stellar groups of people I have ever worked with, and they keep me on my toes, and they don't mess around, and they ask hard questions, and they make sure that everyone is showing up and giving the absolute best to all of you. So I just wanted to share that first out of the gate.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean it, all of it. So about 2015, I had been working in corporate wellness for about 10 years, and I was really frustrated with a lot of what was happening. And I could tell my colleagues and my clients all the things that I thought that we were doing wrong, but I really couldn't tell anybody how to make it right. And so, like anybody who's really good and crazy, I left the standard wellness world and started my own business. And if you're in a position where you can tell everybody what's going wrong, but you don't know how to make it right, first thing I needed to do was figure out what the heck wellness even was to me and why it mattered, so that I had some kind of foundation to launch from. And I came up with 3 really important things. And what's been lovely for me is that these 3 things have held up over time. So I've been in business for myself for 4 years now, and occasionally these things will pop back up and they hold true. So the first is that this work, corporate wellness work, is about people. And the reason that was really important for me to say is that I often found myself in meetings where we would spend so much of our time talking about the tool that was there to help people compared to, or instead of the actual people and their needs. And so, you know, what happens is when we talk about wellness, sometimes we get caught up in the diet plan or the fitness program or the the online platform, and then we end up talking about that tool as the thing, but in reality, the thing is the people. And so that's really important to me. The second one is that well-being is always additive to one's life. So what I found in my little over a decade of doing this work is that people often would say to me, you know, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for my health, but it's going to be miserable, and but I'm going to do it anyway. And I just, you know, I found that really fascinating. And in my own experiences, I find that misery and well-being are in fact mutually exclusive, and it's an important thing to keep in mind. And I think that that's really important to consider as practitioners or leaders in the corporate wellness industry, is that we have to be creating opportunities for people to add value to their own lives, and that's how we'll start to achieve well-being. And then the last thing that I noticed is that when people are in a place of well-being, they find ways to share their gifts and their talents with the world. Comparatively, when people are not in a place of well-being, they're in what I call the circle of survival, where you can only really respond to what's coming at you. And even that can be difficult sometimes. And what's interesting about that is whenever I talk about it, people go like there's that knowing yes, like I know what the circle of survival is like. But if we think about being in a place of well-being, oftentimes we find people who are willing to share their gifts and resources with other people. So, you know, I've always been really curious about the role that a workplace or culture played in corporate well-being, because if you've been leading a program that has a great strategy and a great operating plan and the right programs, but it's just not hitting the mark, and you can't, you know, hit that tide as it turns things, oftentimes it's the culture of the organization that's playing a role. And what I have noticed over my career is that culture is created through a million micro moments between employees in connection with one another. So furthermore, we are all collectively responsible to the culture of an organization. And that's been a really important shift for me in a different way in which I approach people who want to talk about corporate wellness. I have this analogy that I use to explain what I mean. So if you'll all engage me in a little bit of vision here. So I want you to imagine your workplace that you're sitting in right now. And I want you to see one person, maybe a colleague from another cubicle, or, you know, if you're in a hospital system, maybe it's like this department floor, but you see one person get up and go and talk to somebody else. And you don't know what they're talking about. Maybe they're talking about Excel spreadsheet or sales pricing or the latest negotiation or prospects. You have no idea what they're talking about. Maybe they're talking about their biometric screening results. And you see them talking, and through their conversation, you can see that they're each holding a light. And through that conversation, you can see that that light either gets brighter or gets dimmer. And let's imagine that in this case, these two individuals made each other's light brighter. So I want you to pan out from that conversation and imagine a sea of cubicles or a department on a hospital floor or a construction site, and you can see all of these people working together and having these interactions with one another, and with them they're carrying around that light. And from there, I want you to imagine you're outside of the building, and you can see if all of the lights have been made brighter through this conversation, the light is pouring out of the building, which, by the way, that's your corporate brand. And you know, I want you then to imagine that at the end of the day, all of these people take their lights home with them. And they get to then share that light with their family and the communities in which they live. So for me, you know, corporate wellness or corporate culture is really created through all of those little interactions, and that light that we're holding is our well-being. So.
I love that. That's such a vivid description, a vivid visual that, I mean, I really could kind of walk through your description to see that, you know, for myself, and then also kind of as I'm walking down the street looking at various organizations and buildings to kind of really put that into perspective. Thank you for sharing that. So what I hear you saying, so correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not hearing this right, but what I hear you saying is that we really should be looking at the workplace itself and the factors such as culture and environment to drive what we do in workplace wellness. Is that correct? And if it is, why do you believe that's the best place to start?
Well, I do think that we need to start with culture as employers. And I think that employers often look really quickly to external sources or solutions without first taking a look at what's going on in the organization and how the organization itself might be diminishing or amplifying people's lives or well-being, so to speak. And when you end up spending as an organization, you know, thousands of dollars on an external solution when you haven't really stopped to consider your own organization and how it's driving health and well-being outcomes, then essentially you're putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. And, you know, that causes a lot of cynicism within the organization. I was listening to a video that the video blog Humans of New York put out, or it's a photo blog. I don't know what they call that nowadays. But anyway, for those of you who've heard of it, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who haven't, it's this really great thing you can follow on Instagram or Facebook. And it's a photographer who goes around and he takes pictures of people or records them, and he captures their stories. And there was a woman who came on a couple years ago, and she said, you know, I'm really stressed at work. I have a ton of stress. And when I told my employer about it, they were like, well, great news. We just got this stress app that will help you learn to calm down and meditate. And it's through our wellness program. Hooray. And she said, direct to the camera, the problem is that wellness has become so commoditized that they don't even realize that the cause of my stress is my toxic manager. And I just sat there as somebody who's been in this industry for a decade, that this woman in like a 3-minute video clearly articulated what I know to be a deep diving cause of our challenges as practitioners and as leaders in the industry. And I think that it just really gets to the point, and it does create a lot of cynicism for the work that we do. And I think that that's something we often have to counter. And what I have found is that what we have now are a lot of employers who say, you know, here's the work that you do, and be really productive and good at that. And when you're done with that work, what we want for you to do is then take care of your well-being. And we've tried to, you know, resolve that by having lunch and learns on site or during work hours or putting a gym on site, but we still hold our well-being separate from the work that we're doing. And that seems categorically problematic to me. So I think that as employers, we have a responsibility to ensure that our institutions aren't driving poor health. And getting back to that light analogy, what are the things that are happening in our organizations? How are people behaving? How are they interacting with each other? What policies and procedures are in place that are negatively impacting one's well-being before we ever start to ask them to be responsible or fix it in their personal lives?
Mm. So I know one of the concepts that you talk about as a driver of some of your work in consulting with organizations and helping them to build strategy is this concept of microinfluence, the science of microinfluence. So is this in kind of what you were just speaking about in helping, you know, the concept of helping employers kind of integrate these concepts of well-being and just work culture? Is that where microinfluence can be impactful for creating change in the way that organizations support their people? Can you talk a little bit more about the science of microinfluence and how that can be a strategy to drive healthy connection in the workplace?
Sure. So what we have now are organizations that have, I find a lot of blame. So if you talk to people about what's going on in an organization, so if we start to say, all right, as an organization, we're going to look at what's driving amplified well-being or diminished well-being. And if you start to have those conversations, what you'll find is a lot of blame. Everybody knows who else's fault it is. And that can be obviously problematic. So what's interesting is that if I'm working with somebody one-on-one in an organization and they come to me and they say, I'm really struggling with this situation with a colleague or my boss, their story is always about what that other person is doing. Now, you always end up in a situation where we can't change the other person, but we can change the way that an individual shows up in that situation. So if we're dealing with somebody, we're basically dealing with somebody's sphere of influence, right? So we really have to focus on what that person can do to change the way that they're showing up in a given situation. And what's so fascinating to me is that oftentimes it changes the perspective of the individual who's doing the work, but it also starts to influence the people around that individual. So what I have come to learn is that marketers call this micro-influence. So what marketers use to get us to buy more things or change our purchasing behaviors is this science of micro-influence. And a micro-influencer is somebody who passionately and authentically endorses something else, and then we ourselves choose, we buy into that endorsement because they have passionately and authentically sold us on it, right? And that's been proven to be 4 times more effective than just like a regular ad or other marketing campaign. So what's really interesting to me, back to that light analogy, is our capacity as human beings to, again, amplify each other's light by the way that we're showing up. So, you know, we need to remember that if we show up authentically in a conversation, in many ways we are endorsing or amplifying authenticity, and we're inviting other people to that, and we're influencing that behavior in the organization. So when we get stuck in blame, then what we're endorsing is blame, right? When we start working on our own sphere of influence in the way that we show up in connection with other people, then we start endorsing that kind of behavior. So basically the goal is to think about what is in your control, what is in your sphere of influence, and how we can become brand advocates for the kind of culture that we want to see in an organization.
Great. That was really interesting, the statistics you shared around the concept of microinfluence and its use in marketing, and how that has, you know, there's actual data to show that there's translation in using a concept like that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other research that you find most important for yourself doing this work, but also, you know, to share with other wellness practitioners and our listeners today, that's helpful to apply when they're thinking about creating this type of organizational culture change?
Yeah, so first of all, I have to chuckle, you know, when you say, like, it's interesting that we find this in marketing research. This has happened to me so many times in my career where I'm talking really passionately about something, and then with somebody smarter than me who goes like, oh yeah, we call that micro-influence, and we have a lot of research on it. And I'm like, oh, fantastic. We're not starting from scratch.
Sure,
so
right.
Always, yeah, like always stay in beginner's mind, because then you never know what's going to land in your lap, and you'll be like, oh, that's really useful. So I have to kind of chuckle at myself often, which is good for me. So one of the things that I find really interesting, and again, I backed into this, is that I had long, before I found out about microinfluence, I had long been an advocate for self-determination theory and its uses, its practical uses in, you know, whenever we're building anything for a corporate wellness strategy, that we build it out of self-determination theory. And for those of you who don't know, self-determination theory says that we have 3 psychological needs that are, when met, significantly increase our potential for behavior change, which as wellness practitioners, this is what we're here to do, is create behavior change. Those three psychological needs are autonomy, competency, and relatedness. And basically, autonomy is I get to enter into this behavior change in a way that makes sense to me. So, you know, when we hand somebody a diet plan, we've lost autonomy. They don't get to choose anymore, right? Relatedness is I'm in relationship with people who value the change that I'm making. And then competency is that I have the knowledge and skills to be able to make the change that I need to make. So, you know, those three things are really important. And we have to make sure that anything we're doing lends itself to those. What was really important to me, though, is this really specific concept within self-determination theory called autonomous extrinsic motivation. And autonomous extrinsic motivation is when, Marissa, if I got to come eat lunch with your team every day, which I may or may not fantasize about, but if let's say that I got to do that, and you guys all talked about how you really love running, and I don't run, and I've never really had a desire to run, but every day you guys kind of check in with each other and you're like, oh, where'd you go yesterday? Or I did this route, and I love the way that I feel when I'm done, and I never want to do it when I begin, but I definitely always feel better. That over time, I would begin to believe that running might be something that's good for me too, right? So it's autonomous. I came to it in my own way. It's extrinsic, it came from an outside source, and it's motivating. Now I'm going to start running. And so we end up buying into the behaviors that are endorsed by others, essentially, which to me sounds a lot like microinfluence, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's this pretty intense overlap between this research and different industries, but both dealing with behavior change. Right? So the reason that microinfluence and self-determination theory, or autonomous extrinsic motivation, which is such a mouthful, but the reason that those two things work in the way that they do is because we desire to be in connection with other people. So our relationships deeply matter to how we can create behavior change and how we can start to impact culture.
Interesting. I love how you're drawing these connections between what you've shared around microinfluence to what we also know in theories of behavior change. It's really fascinating and impactful to hear about. So when we were early on planning our agenda for this upcoming WCWI's upcoming annual conference, we had reviewed your presentation submission and really loved the concept right away. And I had some time to talk to you and kind of understand a little bit more about your philosophy as well from a background perspective. But one big question we had for you was, how do you make this applicable and actionable for the attendees in your session and for other wellness practitioners? So can you share what you shared with us and summarize it for our attendees today, how you make this concept or all of these different concepts together applicable for people to actually translate within their own organization and implement? Definitely.
So first of all, I have to say that when you asked me, like, Maggie, this is awesome, but you're going to have to get really specific and tell people how, because my people need how, and my people need answers. I was just like, preach, sister, this is awesome, because, I can always deeply appreciate any leader who's going to be willing to ask hard questions and put people in a little bit of an uncomfortable spot. And also somebody who's been a part of this industry where, there were years that I went to conferences and just felt like I had idea fatigue. And I really didn't have anything that helped me concretely put anything into action, right? And so I just, first want to say, how your endorsement of that led me right into that myself, an appreciation for that. So you influenced me. So the point being that this is actually one of the hows, and this is what I said to you that day, is that we can't undermine as practitioners this understanding of aligning ourselves in a posture that is authentic and that's passionate for us. Because it changes the way that we think about our work. It changes the way that we filter things through for people that we serve, everything. So, you know, your ability to ask tough questions to the people who might come speak at your event comes from your own influence, your own authenticity, your own passion. So what I have learned is that this concept of microinfluence and self-determination theory, though we've seen them come alive in research, actually have this really ancient term, and it's called exousia. And exousia is an ancient Greek word that means out of or from being. And it's when we recognize as authoritative that which emerges from the heart of being. So when you say to me, Maggie, it's really important to me to make sure that you can give my people concrete answers, I am willing to let you be the authority on what your people need because I am bought into what you are saying. You have presented me your exousia, essentially. And so this is like, exousia is like vulnerability, courage, and authenticity in one like Brene Brown mic drop word. And it comes from this ancient Greek. So I think that as practitioners and leaders and insurance brokers or insurance providers or vendors, all of us, we need to recognize even the power of understanding what it is that we're here to offer from the core of who we are. Because when we do that, one, it changes the way that we think about the work that we're here to do. So that was my process of kind of recentering about this work is about people, not about the tools, not about the technology. Those can be things that we bring in to support people, but at the core of it, it's about people. So it helps me shift the conversation that I'm having with other people. It invites, and then when I do that, I invite other people to acknowledge that with me there. I invite leaders to come along with me there. So I want to give an example because again, I wanted to get the how really specific. I once was doing consulting for a construction firm where I had the opportunity to prospect for a construction firm. And when I went in, I had talked to the HR personnel, I had talked to the insurance broker, and then the CEO came in and he very bluntly took over the meeting and said, listen, I am tired of spending the money I'm spending on this, and it's not working. And what I want you to do is to call everyone who has biometric screening results that are out of range, and I basically want you to harass them into compliance. Like, I'm tired of this. Now, practicing Brene Brown's most gracious hypothesis, I'm going to say that I think that that CEO was in fact really struggling and frustrated with the fact that nobody had given him great answers. So what I had said to him was, first of all, there's harassment laws that we have to be careful of. And he said, I'm not concerned about that. And then he said, and then I said, here's the thing, when I didn't get the out on the harassment laws, and I was like, oh, I'm really on my toes now, I got to think of something right now to hand this guy. So what I said to him was, for the same cost that you could probably have me call and harass your employees, I could put somebody on site in all of your construction trailers to build relationships. Or one of the things that they're really struggling with was the dietary habits of construction employees because they're out and they often end up at convenience stores or fast food restaurants. So I said, or you could I could help you find the right caterer and you could cater healthy lunch every day for your employees for the same cost. And that's where, you know, having my posture in the right place, I wouldn't allow for us to be harassing people into compliance. One, because I know that that doesn't work, but two, because it's just outside of my values. It's outside of my exousia, right? Now, I didn't get that client, but that's okay because, you know, we had a different way that we intended to influence change for people. So I think that that's an important example of how we have to consider where our own heart is and where we grant people authority to lead.
Thank you for sharing that story of your own experience and having had a tough conversation. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about, share kind of your suggestions or recommendations for our attendees and our listeners about working with leadership that are not initially aligned with your people-focused, culture-focused strategy. I think that's a big question for a lot of people, is how do we move forward through tough conversations like that to bring people along and or to just essentially get their input on these types of more people-focused strategies. So any nuggets of wisdom that you can share with our people that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I have three responses to this question. And the first is fly under the radar when you can. Now, I am like a maverick or a renegade type of personality. So this feels more comfortable to me. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, so I am more comfortable. But what I want to say is that oftentimes well-being or wellness agendas fly under the radar in companies. And we wish, like there are times that we wish that wasn't the case, right? We wish it was like on the top of everybody's priority, and I think we need to get there. But if you're in an organization where you're struggling with that connection between your executive leadership and their ideas and your understanding of how to go about this work, use that under the radar to get some things done. So another example, I have a client currently where the CEO really does not understand the culture-focused work that we're doing. So in addition to programming with HR, who's a huge advocate of the culture piece of it, we're doing all of that, but simultaneously we did a weight loss class, we did a 5K, we did an outdoor wellness program. I mean, we've done all of these other kind of more traditional things that helps them to see that we're still doing all of this work, that the goal is still the same. And so even when we did the marketing, it was like, here's all the things that are going to happen this year in the wellness program, and then here's this like culture piece that we're going to do. And the culture piece is probably about 50% of the work in all reality. But in terms of even the way that he saw it, it looked like a tiny piece. Now, so in that example, as we continue to do the culture work, just like we had hoped, it was the most powerful work, and it's what created that microinfluence, and it's what's created word of mouth. And so without us trying, people are talking about the work and he's hearing about it, and we're starting to see him shift. So this is where, if you don't have executive buy-in for the approach that you want to take, it's okay to fly under the radar and start a grassroots movement, right? Like, you're not doing anything that's harmful to the organization by talking about people being better advocates and kinder to one another, right? So, okay. So the second thing is, it's not your job to fix the CEO, right? Your job is to influence them. So just in the way that you influenced me by saying, look, I have to really make sure that you understand that the how and the concrete ideas are really important. Simultaneously, as leaders in an organization, it's our job to authentically and passionately represent those things that matter. And we're going to have some wins and we're going to have some losses. But it's not our job to fix the CEO. And this one is really important to me because I get stuck on this one a lot. Like, I find myself in the shower thinking about ways that I can just like convince that person of why I'm right. And I have to frequently remind myself that my job is to influence them through the way that I show up. And then and also find your advocate. So in some organizations, I might not have the CEO who understands me, or gets the work, but the COO or the CRHO does, right? And then I can go to them when I'm feeling particularly vulnerable or when I need a nudge to occur. I can go to these advocates and have them, you know, support the work from a back end. And then the last thing is, there's a saying, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. And if you're in an organization where you have no advocates, where you have done the passionate, authentic thing, it's okay to leave. Like, we are people leading a movement of self-care in the world. And so this is one of those where sometimes we need to take our own self-care into account. And we cannot keep running up to a brick wall and falling back down and expect that we're going to be okay with our own well-being.
Thank you for kind of laying out a wide spectrum of different avenues that people can try to focus on when having tough conversations or just having conversations in general. That was helpful. Thanks so much. So Maggie, that concludes our kind of question interview session. I think you've really given some great high-level insight into what it is that you will be focusing on in your session at conference, which I really appreciate. So there's so much more. This is just scratching the surface. There's quite a bit more, I think, that you'll be able to share and expand upon at conferences here. So thank you.
Yes, it's my pleasure. I hope we got some good questions. Let's see here.
All right.
Anybody
well,
I was going to say, I think Lisa's going to take
Anyone can take the lead at this point. In fact, I encourage our participants to take the lead by submitting any questions that you have within the Zoom group chat. I know that we have two here that we can always kick off with as our participants are maybe thinking and gathering their thoughts before they share. So I'll just wait a couple seconds and then we can ask the questions. To kick off, one question that we have is, you speak of advocates, Maggie, and, what would you really look for in a true advocate?
That is a really good question. So an advocate for well-being?
I would say for well-being, but more so for your values and the well-being in the organization as you create that strategy.
So first of all, just kind of a plug for advocacy. So again, we mentioned with Microinfluence, it can be 4 times as impactful. And what's interesting to me is that over the years, what I have seen is that the organizations who are able to get everyone engaged with wellness in the workplace really have these just incredible advocates, these people who get the work and are here for people. But another thing that's really important for me when I think about the advocacy that's needed in workplaces is in the work that I've done, and I do a lot of one-on-one work with people. So I go into organizations and I do what I call listening campaigns. And that's been really helpful for me to understand the kind of advocacy that's needed. And, I think that if I'm looking for an advocate, I need somebody that's empathetic, right? I think when we often think about corporate wellness advocates, we think about somebody who is really is vegan and runs marathons and comes to work with the smoothie thing and weight trains, and the rest of us look at them and we're just like, where does this person find the time, right? And I think that is a misrepresentation of what people actually need to achieve well-being. I mean, I'm not here to downplay that person's success, But what I am here to say is that a lot of times the things that have led to somebody's poor well-being is something that was outside of their control. And it doesn't mean that they're not responsible for managing their well-being when it's in their control or when they're in those circumstances. But I think that we put too much focus on individual behavior instead of offering to be helpful and supportive of an individual when they're in a time of crisis. So, for example, I had a woman who came to me and was like, I want to quit smoking, I want to lose weight, and I want to start exercising. Now, I'm a wellness coach, like I'm a dietitian through my education. I was like, this is the golden ticket. Quit smoking, lose weight, start exercising. I was super excited to help this person. And she was super excited to get started. And we had a check-in after 2 weeks. And what she told me was that she had done nothing of any of the things we talked about, which was really surprising to me because she seemed quite motivated when she entered in my door the first time. And when I asked her what kind of things were getting in the way, what she shared with me was that she had married someone who was a recovered drug addict and that her spouse had relapsed. And she literally was trying to lose everything. And what I realized in that moment, that when she came to me, this attempt to fix all of these things in her life was an attempt for control in a world that otherwise she had no control. I had another woman who came to me who said, Maggie, I just finished chemotherapy and I'm finally breast cancer free and I'm so happy to be alive. And they asked me to gain weight while I was on chemotherapy, and now I need to lose weight, but and I want to fully live and eat food again, but I also am terrified to eat because I read all these things that pop up on Facebook about how sugar can cause cancer, right? And so, you know, if either of those people would have been represented or responded to with the advocate who's already running marathons, who has a protein shake in the morning, who's vegan the rest of the day, that's not always necessarily the advocate that we need. So what I mean when I say advocates are people who are willing to empathize with the things that negatively impact our well-being and to say, me too. I've been broken, I've had difficulties too, and here are some tools that I can point you in the direction of to get you the help that you need that your company offers. So like an employee assistance program or a financial wellness tool, you know, any of those legal help, you know, those types of things. And so it really stems first and foremost from a willingness to be vulnerable with people and to be empathetic about the situation that they're in that diminish their well-being.
Great. Thank you for that answer. And, you know, as you were talking about, you know, looking at what negatively impacts well-being, you mentioned earlier on within this interview that our jobs as employers is to first and foremost ensure that our institutions don't negatively impact well-being. And then we can begin to provide tools and other aspects that support their health and well-being. My question for you is, you know, are there areas that are often looked in organizations that are negatively impacting well-being?
I think that we have a true crisis and a lack of civility in workplace. There's actually a TED Talk about this. I don't know the exact title of it, but I'm sure if you Google TED Talk civility, you could find it. And what's interesting is because I'm an ambassador for curiosity, oftentimes my husband and I will watch TV in the evening, whatever show is on, and you know, we're watching somebody, and at some point the show is about their job, right? And I find even in television shows, you'll have one employee who they end up in some really dramatic situation, and you know, a coworker will come in and in their frustration just start to begin to yell and point fingers and carry on ridiculously with the other person. And it finally hit me the other day. I looked at my husband and I was like, oh my gosh, we're endorsing this kind of behavior through television. I never even thought about it before. But you know, oftentimes in organizations, when you're talking to people about the things that are barriers to their well-being, there are workplace relationship issues, whether it's a colleague, another team member, a middle manager, an executive, you know. So, I mean, I've had people show up in my office if the door happens to be open, and they'll come in with tears and just say, you know, my boss just blew up in my face. And like, I have a kindergartner, and the things they're learning are that, like, we don't yell at other people. We treat everybody the way that we want to be treated. The expectation is kindness, you know. And the reason that we teach these things early is that they're foundational. And I don't know where the business agenda has gotten to a point that it trumps basic civility in the workplace, but I think that that is a place that's really important to start. I know of an organization that has a policy of zero gossip. I think that's fantastic. As organizations, I think that we have to consider the ways in which we are outlining expectations of behavior. And, you know, we expect that because we all learn these things in kindergarten that they don't need to be said again. But I think that we've reached a point in our culture, and we've been allowed to behave this way, and people have gotten away with it, that we need to reassert these expectations of basic human decency in the workplace. Like, if somebody is yelling at somebody else or being aggressive, verbally aggressive in a meeting, absolutely we need somebody in leadership to step in and say, that's not okay, in the moment, right then and there. Like, we can talk, but we're gonna cool our jets. I think that we need to talk about, and we need to give employers the skill sets, or employees the skill sets around feedback. And we need to talk about how good feedback is an expectation. You know, these are things that are negatively impacting somebody's well-being, and we can't ignore that. We can't go, oh, and here's your stress app because you have a really great wellness program. But it's a failure of resources in our organization to have an uncivil workplace and then to pay for a stress app. And that's not to diminish the stress app. That's to say that it's a both and.
Right. Right. Wow. Thank you so much.
We need to hand the stress app. Well, you said we need to hand the stress app to the person who was uncivil. We think it's your stress.
Yes, very, very true. And we appreciate this, you know, the raw, honest, and answer insights. And it's getting me excited to hear more from you at our annual conference. And now I want to switch a question from our negative impact to our positive impact. How do you know you're creating positive change, and how do you translate that to your leadership and or decision makers?
Storytelling, and I know that's not a great answer, but I just, you know, I have asked people in self-determination theory and in self-determination theory experts and in microinfluence experts, and one of the things even that they struggle with is really quantifying that change. What we're talking about is what happens between two people in relationship with one another, and the way that has a ripple effect in the rest of the organization. You know, I think that there are some self-report kind of things that we can do. I like to use Cantrell's wellness ladder to ask people about their overall sense of well-being, you know, before we do any kind of intervention and after, but also like a year out from that intervention, right? Because if we're creating a ripple effect, that should be a lasting change. What we're doing in the short term is collecting stories, and they're stories that we hear. So I literally was sitting in an office on site with a client, and I heard one IT guy walk into another IT guy. Like, they're not generally like outwardly emotional, right? He walked in and he goes, listen, Mike, I'm here to brighten your light today. And I was just like, and they didn't know that I could hear, but I just thought, you know, and they kind of chuckle because it's kind of cheesy, but they get what it means, right? Like, he had good news that he wanted to share, and he was actively connecting with a colleague. And so what I also know about these two individuals is they're not two individuals that have previously done a great job at connecting. And so to be able to say, you know, to collect these stories, these little montage moments, and hand them to an executive who has also been struggling to get these two individuals to work better on IT solutions or whatever, and say, here's the progress we're making, is meaningful to them. Of course, we'd love to be able to have like some really hard facts of what's happened, but I think some of this is always intended to kind of still be a mystery, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm here to show up and be kind and good, not because I can quantify it, but because it's the right thing to do. And that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Did I answer your question?
You did. And I know we're actually right on time here, so just to stay on track with our participants, I just wanted to open it up one more time. If anybody else had any questions, we're monitoring our Zoom group chat, and otherwise, Marissa, I know you had the pleasure of asking Maggie multiple questions today, but did you have any additional questions for her? No. Marissa, is your phone on mute? There we go.
Thank you. Stopping me as I'm just like, yes, I was just going to say, I don't have any additional questions, Maggie, thank you. But I was just going to make a note. I put this in the chat as well for the researcher that you just referenced. Her name's Christine Perath, and she's out of Georgetown University. She has some really interesting research and findings around workplace incivility. There is a TED Talk. She has a book. There's some, it's very aligned with all that Maggie shared with us today. So definitely check that out.
We'll share that in the follow-up email. Perfect. Great. Well, I just want to give a reminder to everyone on the webinar today that you will be at our 29th Annual Employee Wellbeing Conference. And what's so special for everyone on today's call is that we will give you one last chance to save your spot to connect with Maggie, our team, and other industry experts as well. Registration did close last week, but because you're joining us today, you'll get an exclusive invite as well. Before we end today's call, I just want to pass off. Maggie, did you have anything else you would like to conclude with?
I'm grateful to be on this call. Like I said earlier, I'm grateful to Marissa and the team. You guys are just incredible. And I am really excited that these conversations are even taking place. I think that this is just the beginning, and that we as the wellness industry are just going to blow the business world out of the water in the next 10 years.
Yes.
Go team.
Woo. Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and you'll hear from us shortly.
Bye.
Bye-bye.